All right, so I want to start off with welcoming you all today. Thank you so much for joining us for this third version of our Badgers on Track workshop, How to Stand Out with Your Resume and Cover Letter. So we'll start off with some introductions. My name is Emmeline Pratke. I am a career and internship specialist with SuccessWorks, and I work mainly with students who are interested in the fields of government, policy, international affairs, and law. And with me today are Devin and Beth. Do you guys want to take a second and say hello?
Absolutely. Thank you, Emmeline. Hello, everyone. It's so nice to be with you. My name is Devin Deegan. I'm also a career and intern specialist with SuccessWorks, and I work specifically with students who are interested in communications, entertainment, and the arts.
And I'm Beth Carabin. I am also a career and internship specialist, and my focus is business and entrepreneurship.
Wonderful. So as you probably heard, we all work with SuccessWorks. If you haven't heard of SuccessWorks, what we are is a center for personal and professional development for LNS students and recent grads. So a couple of the things that we do are virtual advising, especially over the summer and into the fall. We help students make connections with employers and alumni. We offer several career courses to help you in your professional development, as well as other events and workshops just like this one. So without any further ado, let's get started with how to stand out with your resume and cover letter. This will be a very interactive workshop, so the couple of ways that we will ask you to participate throughout the session are in polls and in the chat box. So if you see either one of these signals coming up throughout the presentation, that's a cue that we are asking you to do something. So to practice a little bit, we are going to first have you sign in to this workshop. And the way to do that is by sending a private message to Beth with your Whiskmail email address. So if you aren't familiar with how to send a private message, the easiest way is to go to the Collaborate panel by expanding the little purple arrows on the right side bottom of your screen. You should be able to click that open and then click on the Attendees panel. So that's the second one over with the little people. Go all the way up to the top where you can see the three moderators, and then click the little three dots next to Beth's name. She's listed as Beth Carabin #2, and we don't know why, but that's just fine. So please click on that circle with the three little dots in it, and it will allow you to send her a chat message. So in that chat message, all you have to include is your Whiskmail email address. And this will allow us to follow up with you after the session and send you some really important materials. So it's important that if you're able to do so, please do so now. And then while you're doing that, I do want to let you know that this session is being recorded. The audio and video of the presenters will be recorded, but the chat participation will be anonymous. So if you're concerned about that, don't be worried. All right, so hopefully you have had a chance to send your Whiskmail email address to Beth. We'll have another reminder later in the session if you weren't able to do so. So now we're going to have you come back to the group chat with everyone who is attending the session today. And the easiest way to do that is by clicking the little chat bubble, again on the bottom right of your screen, and then clicking the chat for everyone. And you should see that I put a message in there like 15 minutes ago just to thank you for joining us today. And if you're able to read that, then you're in the right place. So once you get back to that group chat message, please go ahead and add an emoji just letting us know how is your day going so far. Okay, it looks like everyone's having a pretty good day. Wonderful. Definitely some magic, happy faces. Oh, cute little frog, wonderful. Fantastic. All right, so the reason we had you do those two different chats is because that is how you'll be able to ask questions throughout the entire workshop. If you have a question that it applies to pretty much everyone in the group, you'll be able to just write it in the group chat. Whereas if you have a question that's more specific to your situation, you can send that in a direct message to Beth and she'll reply to you directly. So however you want to ask questions, please feel free to do so. All right, so now that you should be pretty familiar with the chat function, we're going to move on to the survey function. So our first survey question for you is, which does an employer read first, the resume or the cover letter? And you should be able to see a survey pop up, and please go ahead and answer. Okay, we'll give it a couple more seconds. If you haven't had a chance to answer, please do so. All right, let's go ahead and close it. Wonderful. So it looks like it's a pretty even breakdown. And guess what? You are absolutely right. Some employers read a resume first, other employers read a cover letter first. And that's why it's so important that both of your documents are strong and that they're able to stand on their own and get your employer interested enough that they want to continue learning about you and continue reading the other document and hopefully invite you in for an interview. So with that in mind, here's what we'll cover today. We'll start with resumes, going over some basic do's and don'ts. Then we'll go into formatting tips and how you can write really effective and strong bullet points. And then we'll move on to cover letters. So again, going over some formatting tips and then talking about the components that you should include in your cover letter. Then we'll wrap things up with submitting your application, which seems like it's a pretty straightforward process, but is actually a lot more complicated than you think. So let's go ahead and get started. So a resume is probably a pretty familiar document to many of you. If you haven't written one, you know kind of what it is. But have you ever really thought about why resumes are so common? They're used in every industry, in every country as the standard way to apply for a job or internship. So why is that? The answer actually really depends on your perspective. For an applicant, a resume is a marketing tool that you can use to highlight your pertinent knowledge, skills, qualities, and achievements, and demonstrate how your experiences meet an employer's qualifications. However, for an employer, it's a little bit different. They use resumes as a screening tool to find the most qualified candidates that they want to join their team. So for both of you, a resume is basically how you can connect your abilities and your motivations with the employer's needs. So with that in mind, we'll move on to some resume do's and don'ts, which is our first interactive portion of this workshop. So the way that this will work is we'll put up a statement on the screen, and then we'll have you vote in the survey whether you think it's a resume do or a resume don't. So our first resume do or don't is write a different resume for each job or an internship opportunity. Is that a resume do or a resume don't? Please go ahead and reply in the survey. Okay, give it a couple more seconds here. All right, it looks like pretty much everyone has responded, so we'll go ahead and close that poll. And it looks like most of you voted that this is a resume do, which is absolutely correct. This is definitely a resume do. And the reason that you're wanting to write a different resume for each job or internship opportunity is because tailoring your resume allows you to really highlight your most relevant skills and experience for that position. So even though it's a little bit more time and a little bit more work, it's definitely worth making those adjustments to show that you're the best candidate possible. All right, next up. Do or don't use plenty of industry-specific terms, jargon, and abbreviations to demonstrate your knowledge and show that you know what you're talking about. Is this a resume do or a resume don't? Go ahead and vote in the survey. Okay, wonderful. We'll give it a couple more seconds here. All right, let's see what you said. Okay, it looks like the majority of people said that this is a resume don't. And you are correct. This is a resume don't, even though it seems a little bit counterintuitive because using industry-specific terms and jargon can make it seem like you know what you're talking about. The problem with that is you never know who at the organization is going to be the one who's reading your resume. It could be someone in HR or a group of people with totally different backgrounds. So you want to avoid using things that they wouldn't be able to understand because then they don't understand why that's important or why that's a great skill for you to have. So in general, you want to make sure that your resume can be understood by a general audience. All right, next up, is it a do or don't to list references on your resume? Please go ahead and vote. All right, let's go ahead and see what your answer was. All right, so the majority of you said that it's a resume don't. And you are correct. You don't need to provide references on your resume unless an organization asks for them. And if they do, they'll usually have you write it into a separate form or a separate sheet. It doesn't hurt you to have references on your resume. It's never a bad thing, but there are just so many other better ways to use that space that it's better to use one of those instead and have the references on that separate document. All right, next up, is it a do or don't to limit what's on your resume to experiences since you started college? So that means nothing from high school or before. Please go ahead and vote in the survey now. Okay, we'll give it a couple more seconds here. And let's see what you said. Okay, so the majority of people believe that this is a resume do. And the majority of you are correct. This is usually a resume do. Because at this point, your high school experience is pretty likely outdated and irrelevant. However, there are some exceptions to this. If you're in your first year at UW-Madison and don't have many other things to put on your resume, or if the experience is very relevant to the opportunity that you're applying for and is the only way that you're showing that skill set and that knowledge, then it's totally fine to include it. And if you have any questions on whether or not something should be included, that's something you can always talk to your career specialist about. All right, next up, is it a do or a don't to use a template from Microsoft Word or Google to build your resume? Please go ahead and vote in the survey. Okay, let's see what you said. Wow, this one was a pretty even split, 50-50. All right. So this is actually a resume don't, and this is a pretty important resume don't. Templates can be really tempting. They can look really pretty, and they can make it like an easy way to kind of make a professional looking resume. The problem with templates is that they don't use space very well. So with most templates, you'll end up with giant blank spaces and teeny tiny little text that's hard to read. Plus, over time, they become really hard to adapt because they aren't made for you to be able to change them with your growing experiences, and over time, they're made to kind of just be what they are and stay that way. So they're a little bit problematic in that way. The other thing to note is that if an organization uses AI as a screening tool, some templates can mess with the system and keep you from making it to the next round. So in general, better safe than sorry. Avoid using templates and kind of do your own formatting when you're doing your resumes. And on that note, I'll pass it over to Devin.
Yeah, thanks, Emmeline. So the do's and don'ts, we touched on a little bit of the resume formatting, but now we're going to talk about this section in a few more details. Alrighty, so first and foremost, when working with a resume, consistency across the document is crucial in a professional resume. So you're going to want to make sure to check your font, your spacing, dates, and titles for consistency, once again, throughout the entire document. This is a document that you'll spend a lot of time with, so it can be easy to miss small errors as you've been working on this document a long time, but an employer will notice everything, so it's really important to be mindful of that when working with this document. It's important to use simple, readable font. For example, you could use Times New Roman, Calibri, Arial, or Georgia are always good choices for fonts to use. If you have a personal favorite, just keep in mind common sense to be ensured that it's clear and professional and neat for employers. You're going to want to avoid hanging words at the end of your bullet point. So that's when you might have a word or two that goes on to an extra line for just that word or two. What you might try to do is rephrase your bullet point or really rework your font style or size. Once again, consistent throughout the whole resume to either shorten the phrase or to move it to that extra line as it'll take up a little more space. Your margins don't necessarily have to be a traditional 1 inch on each side. If you're looking for more space in your document, if you have a lot of information you want to include, you can go down to 0.5 for your margins on each side. And that'll allow you to include some of that extra information. You'll also want to fill any excessive white space on the document. So if you have a large area on your resume that's blank, really try to think creatively about how you could reformat things or add information to fill in. We'll talk a little bit about this later. You don't necessarily want to cram so much on a page where it's overwhelming for an employer, but big blocks of white space can give the impression to the employer that you might not have the skills or experience to be successful in the role, which is definitely not true. And last but not least, in a vast majority of the cases, your resume is only going to be a single page. There are a few exceptions to this rule, but in general, it's expected that most professionals, entry-level professionals, will have 1 page of experience. You really want to focus on experiences on your resume that are relevant to the job that you're applying to. So don't feel the need to necessarily include everything that you've done during your time in college. So now we're going to talk about the various resume sections and what the components take to compile a resume. So these are sections that you should absolutely have on your resume and are super important. Your header, education section, and an experience section. And we'll dive into each one of these individually next. So first and foremost, in your header, so headers typically belong at the top of your resume. What you'll notice is this individual's name, so Helen White, is larger than the rest of the text, and a lot of folks like to bold this as well, just to stand out to employers, and there's no questions about whose application materials these are when employers looking at your documents. You're also welcome to include your contact information in a single line beneath your name. So it's pretty common to add your phone number, your WISC email. A lot of folks as well like to add LinkedIn profiles and accounts to give an employer, a chance to see a more complete and detailed version of the candidate as well. Also, if you're a student who's maybe worked in has various portfolios, maybe a GitHub, this would be the opportunity to link that in your header section as well. So another section that you're absolutely going to want to include is your education section. So we've included here a couple examples of what this section might look like. You'll notice that each has the same general information, but there's various ways that you can choose to represent this on your document. First and foremost, you're going to want to include the name of the university. So University of Wisconsin-Madison. I always like to tell folks you're welcome to bold this institution name. We are a top 30 university in the world, which is definitely something to be proud of. So go ahead and bold that as it'll stand out for employers to see. You also want to include your graduation date in this section as well. You can see listed May 2021, the second example, May 2019. You'll also want to identify what you studied. So for example, psychology and any minors or certificates that you might have also tackled during your experience at the university. You'll see in our various examples, some folks choose to use the word minor. Other folks use certificate like we do at UW-Madison. Across the country, employers might not necessarily know what a certificate means. So we really encourage folks to use the verb liner in this section, just so it's standard for employers. One last thing you'll want to include if you feel comfortable is your GPA. It's important to note that if students don't put a GPA on their resume, employers will assume it's under a 3.0. So if it's over and you feel comfortable, go ahead and throw that on your resume as well in this section. And the last section that's a must-have is your experience. And this will really take up a large bulk of your resume as you start to build experiences throughout your college career. So once again, here's some examples of what your experience section could look like. You'll notice that both include the title, organization, location, and dates of the experience under a single line. And then underneath those lines are bullet points that describe the completed tasks and really focus on the skills that one learned throughout their experience. We'll talk more about bullet points later, but a good general rule is to have between 3 and 5 bullet points per each experience in this section. So now we'll talk about sections that you can choose to have on your resume. So these, once again, the header education section in your experience is what you absolutely need to have. But depending on the space that you have available, these are some possible directions you could go in. So first and foremost, it's important to pay attention to the keywords in the job description that you're applying to. So for example, if you are applying to a role that is customer service oriented, if you have space on your resume and you really want to pull out some of those customer service experiences that you've had throughout your time in college, you can choose to have a section titled customer service experience or relevant customer service experience. You can do the same with projects as well, and this is not limited to what you've done in the classroom. If you've done personal projects, maybe you designed a website or did something like that, you could have a project section where you feature these various projects and what you learned and the various skills that you demonstrated throughout that process. The same goes for involvement in volunteering. So if you are involved in a student org, maybe you're a college athlete on campus, or if you participate in various leadership workshops or conferences, that's totally appropriate to put this on your resume as well. And lastly, skills, which we'll talk about on the next slide as well. So if you speak any languages, or if you have any tech or software skills, databases, certifications, you can also include that in this section. Really, whatever is relevant for the job that you're applying to, keep that in mind. When an employer looks at your resume, they really want to see experiences and skills reflected that are going to make you a good candidate for that job. So as promised, here is a brief example of what an optional section could look like. You see that we chose to focus on the workshops and conference section. It has the same basic format as the experience section that we talked about previously, but you don't necessarily need the 3 to 5 bullet points that we recommended earlier. You don't necessarily need as much detail as your experience section. With the skills and language section that we talked about before, you'll see that on the bottom here. It's important after each language that you might talk about to include the level that you are at. So if you are a beginner, intermediate, or advanced speaker, you could also include words like conversational, proficient, fluent in describing your skill. You'll want to try to avoid in this section listing soft skills, so things like customer service, I have good attention to detail, I have leadership skills. For those, we really want you to work into your experience section within your bullet points. This skills section should simply focus on hard skills that you have. So for example, tech, written and or spoken languages, as you can see there. And now I'll kick it over to Emmeline for strong and effective bullet points.
Wonderful. Thanks, Devin. So now that you kind of have an idea of the sections of a resume and how your resume should be laid out, now you need to know how to fill all of those sections. And the best way to do that is with bullet points. So SuccessWorks has this formula, which is what we recommend as an easy way to create really strong bullet points. So that formula is basically starting off with an action verb, something like resolved, analyzed, anything like that that communicates a skill, a knowledge, or an accomplishment. And then in the second part, going into what you did, how you did it, which is usually pretty intuitive. That's kind of what you know a bullet point is going to have. But then the complicated part, the, I guess, less intuitive part, is that you want to conclude with the result or the purpose of your actions. And kind of as I mentioned, that can be a little bit hard to explain. So I think the best way to make it kind of clear is in an example. So you can see underneath our little arrangement here, we have a bullet point that is resolved customer questions and concerns by coordinating with team members to follow store policy and provide excellent customer service. So you can see that this bullet point follows the formula. It starts off with an action verb, which is resolved, so that immediately communicates problem-solving skills, and then goes into a little bit more information about what you did, which is resolved customer questions and concerns, how you did it by coordinating with team members, and then the result or the purpose. So you did this in order to follow store policy and provide excellent customer service. So you can see that without that underlined blue portion of the result or the purpose, it's still an okay bullet point. It's still a solid basic bullet point. But by adding the result or the purpose, you're including an additional 2 skills that would be really relevant to pretty much any job or internship. So that's why it's important to kind of include the result or the purpose, even though it's not as intuitive. So to give you a little bit more practice with this, we are going to talk about building better bullet points. So hopefully some of you have your resumes. If you do, you probably have some bullet points on there that are relatively what you'd call basic. So an example of a basic bullet point that's not a bad bullet point, but it's not a great bullet point, is something like tutored kids in math. So when you're thinking about how to build a better bullet point, you want to think about how could you quantify this bullet point? How did the candidate complete this task? What was the purpose or the impact of this task? So those are kind of the 3 elements you want to be thinking about when building a better bullet point. So, for example, a better bullet point of this version could be tutored 12 fifth grade students in mathematics by organizing individual appointment times and creating lesson plans based off of the course material, which improved the average class grade from 67% to 87%, or 78%. So in there, you can see in the better bullet point, we've quantified some information in including 12 fifth grade students. We talked about how the candidate completed the task. So by organizing individual appointment times and creating lesson plans based off of the course material, and what was the purpose or the impact, it improved the average class grade from 67% to 78%. That is kind of how you would include a better bullet point. All right, so now it is your turn to build a better bullet point. If you have a version of your resume available, you can use a bullet point that you have already written. Otherwise, if you don't have your resume accessible, that's totally fine. You can use this example, which is worked as a cashier. So now we're going to ask you to build a better bullet point from that existing bullet point. So think about how you could quantify this bullet point. How did you complete this task? What was the purpose or impact of the task? And then write a better bullet point using the bullet point formula. So again, that's starting off with an action verb, going into what you did, how you did it, and the result or the purpose. And so we're going to give you a couple minutes to work on this, but once you're done, please copy and paste both your basic bullet point and your better bullet point into the chat box. And if you have any questions, let us know. All right, it looks like Beth has shared an example and we have another. Thank you both for posting. So feel free to kind of keep working on this. They don't have to be perfect. Again, the chat is anonymous, so don't worry if your bullet point isn't perfect. It doesn't have to be. It looks like we have a couple more examples. Wonderful. Thank you all so much. Give it another couple seconds here. All right. So hopefully you all have kind of this basic instruction format down. So now we just want to work on kind of analyzing these, breaking down one of your better bullet points to see what a difference it made. So to do that, I'm going to go ahead and move us over to the whiteboard function, which will take just a second. Okay, so now let's take a look at some of the examples that you were able to post. All right, here is a great one. I'm just going to put this in here so that we can take a close look at it. All right, just want to get this onto the actual screen if it will let me. Well, it doesn't really want to let me do that, so I'll try again. Or not. Okay, so here is a great example of a basic bullet point. Provide counsel for undergraduate students on personal, academic, and career concerns. Wonderful. And let's take a look at a better bullet point. Provide counsel for 25 undergraduate students on a personal, academic, and career concerns. And it looks like it got cut off there, but help create a safe and welcoming environment. Wonderful. So you can see how in this basic bullet point, it's pretty solid. It has a good explanation of kind of what you did. It's an impressive task that you accomplished. So it's definitely a good example. But in this better bullet point, you have number one, some quantified information of 25 undergraduate students, which is fantastic. That really helps to provide the scope of what you were doing, because counseling 25 undergraduate students is very different from counseling 500 undergraduate students, and each one of those kind of represent a different skill set. So it's good to be a little bit more specific and add that level of detail when you can. And it looks like we also have the results or the purpose in here, which was to help create a safe and welcoming environment. So this kind of goes back to what we were talking about, why the result or the purpose is important. In another position, you might not necessarily be providing counsel for undergraduate students, but it's always going to be relevant that you can help create a safe and welcoming environment. So that's a fantastic addition on there that is really helpful and makes this a better bullet point. All right, I hope all of that is clear. I'm just going to transition us back to the presentation. If you have any other questions on this or would like some more practice, you can always get in touch with us and we can help you kind of work through this in a little bit more detail. Okay. So now we are going to take a break for some questions because, oh, looks like I got a little weird formatting there. But we're going to take a break and ask for some questions because we are finished with our resume section and getting ready to move on to cover letters. So if you have questions about anything that we've gone over so far, please put it into the group chat box now, or you can also raise your hand using the little person that's on the bottom of your screen. You can raise your hand and we'll call on you to turn on your audio and ask a question that way, whichever you prefer. If you have any kind of questions, let us know now. Okay, it looks like Brady has a question on here. Are there any places that we can find examples of resumes? Absolutely. There are a couple of example resumes on the SuccessWorks website, and we can send out some of those examples after this session. If you're also interested in terms of a template resume, like if you just kind of want some basic formatting that won't mess with any AI systems, but is really clear and easy to read, that's also something we'll include in the follow-up messages after this session is done. So definitely keep an eye on your email. And again, if you haven't had a chance to sign in yet by sending a private message to Beth, please do so now so that we make sure you get those follow-up emails. But yes, we'll send along an example of a resume as well as a template to kind of help you get started with any of that. All right, another great question. Is there any way we can get the slides? Yes, this session will be recorded, so you'll get both the recorded session as well as the slides to help you follow up and anything that you need for the session. Okay, ooh, a great question here from Joyce. If we want to get jobs out of state, are there certain things we should or should not put on a resume? Devin, do you want to handle that one?
Yes, absolutely. I'm happy to tackle that one. That's a great question. This really goes back to the header where we were talking about, where you're listing your name and your contact information. So if you're an out-of-state student, and let's say you're from Massachusetts and you're applying to a job in Massachusetts, definitely recommend putting your home address on there. That really stands out to employers to have that in-state talent and folks that they can recruit. So absolutely go ahead and list that on there if you're able.
Yeah, it can definitely be helpful if you have any experience in a certain location. It's helpful to include that on the resume so that employers kind of know that you're familiar with it. However, it's not necessary. I would say that's another thing that you can kind of address in your cover letter. If you don't have any experience somewhere and are kind of worried about an employer maybe thinking that holding that against you as a candidate, you can always use some space in your cover letter to explain why you're interested in this location. So that's another great way to kind of respond to that if you're concerned. Okay, another good question. Is it in your resume, is it more appropriate to use past tense, action verbs, or present tense? That will actually depend on whether you're currently doing a job or internship or volunteer experience. In that situation, you can use present because the dates will reflect that you're still currently doing that position. However, if it's something that's in the past that you've completed, then past is probably a better bet. Another great question from Kristen, should you include experiences you quit or had a bad experience at? That's something that kind of depends. You know, if it was something where you learned a lot and you feel like you gained some good skills, then it's still something that you can put on your resume, especially if you aren't including references from that position. It's still something that you learned, it's still skills that you gained, so it's okay to put it on there, but it's kind of up to you if you feel like that's worth having on there or not. And that's something I would definitely recommend talking with an advisor about if you have any concerns about any of those situations. That's a great thing we can talk through in person to hear more about kind of what happened and decide the best way to follow up. Okay, another great question from Kelly. Once we're satisfied with our resume, is there anyone we can send it to that's knowledgeable about industry hiring standards? Devin, do you want to take that one?
Yes, I'm happy to. So we do have specialists in our office, but a great tool that we have access to is our wonderful network of alumni who work within all of these industries. And we get to connect, we get the awesome opportunity to connect with these individuals and chat with them. But we do have an alumni mentorship program through our office that connects students. If they're interested, we hope that you as students we'll take that initiative and reach out. So that's something that we pride. But yes, there's that opportunity for that connection and practice a little networking in that as well. So.
Absolutely, and your advisors are also generally pretty knowledgeable about our different career areas. So for example, I specialize in government policy, international affairs, and law. So I have a little bit more background in that industry to kind of help answer questions around there. So definitely whoever you have questions to, there's a lot of different places you can go for that kind of information. All right, so we're running a little bit low on time, so I want to make sure we can cover letters as well. So you have a ton of great questions, which is fantastic. We will follow up with you after the session to answer any of these questions that we aren't able to get to now. I'll get you some more information about that toward the end of the session. But thank you for all of your wonderful questions. I wish we had more time. I wish the session could go forever and ever so that we could answer all of them. But again, if you have individual questions, you can always send those privately to Beth, or if you have follow-up questions after the session is over, you can always email us. All right, so let's move on and shift gears a little bit to talk about cover letters. So like a resume, a cover letter is probably a relatively familiar document. You kind of have an idea of why it's important and why it's included. But have you ever really thought about why most employers require both a resume and a cover letter? The reason for that is because a cover letter is not a repeat of your resume. In fact, they're actually very, very different documents with different goals. So unlike a resume, a cover letter is really tailored to highlight your relevant skills and experience through very specific examples. It helps to show the employer that you understand their mission, values, and goals. You can explain in detail why you're interested in the role and why you're a good fit for the company. You can demonstrate your writing and communication style and all of your skills to be able to kind of do that kind of professional writing and professional communication. And it also allows you to show your motivation and your personality, which are really important. And to illustrate that, we will do another survey. So in this situation, I would like you to imagine that you are a hiring manager who is overviewing applications for a children's librarian at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. So these are 3 candidates, 3 applications that you receive, and just the first few sentences to keep it a little bit easier. So candidate A says, "My name is Helen White, and I'm writing to apply for the children's librarian position at UW-Madison. I hope you will agree that my skills in teaching and experience organizing and maintaining library materials make me a strong candidate for this role." Candidate B says, "As a child, I explored the jungles of Africa, walked the Great Wall of China, and sailed the Caribbean Sea. At least I did in my imagination. Reading allowed me to experience new worlds, and I earned my degree in library science to be part of igniting the same spark of learning in future generations. Now I hope to apply my skills in program development and customer service as a children's librarian with UW-Madison." And candidate C, "I am writing to apply for a job with your organization. My skills include organization, communication, and teamwork." So please respond in the survey which candidate you would like to bring in for an interview. Okay, we'll give you a couple more seconds. Please go ahead and choose candidate A, B, or C. All right, let's see what you said. Okay, so we have a couple people who would like to bring in candidate A, but the majority of you are interested in interviewing candidate B. So I think this really goes to show that something interesting, something unique, something compelling really is what makes a hiring manager want to learn more about you. So a cover letter is a really great place to kind of show that personality and that motivation, that background, what makes you really unique, to be able to show that and everything that you'd bring to the position. I also do want to mention candidate A, that's a very common way to structure a cover letter. It's not bad, but as you can kind of see, it's not as interesting, it's not as engaging. So to really help you make sure that you can write a compelling and engaging cover letter, it's important that you take some time to reflect before you write. So the things you want to think about are basically why them and why you. So when you're thinking about why them, you want to be specific about why are you interested in this opportunity. So not just a job in general, but why this company, why this position, and how do the organization's missions and goals align with your own? What do you hope to gain from this opportunity, whether that's an internship where you want professional experience and connections, or a full-time position that you want to advance your career? What are you hoping to gain here? But you also have to think about why you, because why them is really only half the picture. So what traits or abilities make you a strong candidate? What unique perspective or experience would you bring to the position?
Oh, it looks like Emmeline's signal is reconnecting. Devin, do you want to go ahead and take point?
Sorry about that. Did I cut out a little bit?
You did.
Okay. All right. So yes, that is what really helps you write a unique, compelling cover letter, even though it's a little bit tedious to do kind of some of that background work. It's very important. And with that, luckily, I will go ahead and pass it over to Devin.
Thanks, Emmeline. So now we're going to talk a little bit about cover letter formatting and how to format a successful cover letter. All right, so in formatting your cover letter, you're going to want to follow a general template that you see here on the left hand of your screen. This resource is also located on our website, and we'll send out a resource guide after, so you'll all have access to this as well. A very helpful document. But once again, consistency between your resume and your cover letter and your whatever other application materials you have is going to be key. So first and foremost, you're going to use the same header that you used for your resume. So once again, your header was your name, bolded, a little bit bigger than the rest of the text, and your contact information. What you can do is simply copy and paste that right at the top of your cover letter. Next, you're going to want to include the date that you're writing the letter, followed by the contact information of the organization that you're applying to. It's totally okay if you aren't able to find every piece of information that's included in the example that you see here. Just include what you can. Next, you're going to want to address the letter. So dear Mr. or Mrs. X, if you know the name of the recruiter or you've been working with someone. Otherwise, dear hiring manager, dear search and screen committee are totally fine to use as well. Every once in a while, we see folks using to whom it may concern. We typically advise against using this phrase as it's very vague, outdated, and cold in general. So try to stay away from to whom it may concern. Make sure that your letter is at least 10-point font, and ideally the same font that you used for your resume once again. And that your margins are 1 inch on each side as well. If you're having trouble making everything fit, you can always play around with the spacing or other less notable features to try to stick on one page. Sticking on one page shows that you have ability to be concise, and honestly, most employers won't want to read past one page, so that's super important as well. Lastly, when concluding the cover letter, you're going to want to make sure to sign it. What you could do is either print and sign the paper, or you also have the option of taking a photo of your signature on a white piece of paper. You can always adjust the background so it's pure white and then crop it and paste into your cover letter. It can take a little bit of time to do this, but I can say it looks very professional. It also shows an employer that you put time and effort into creating this document as well. So now we're going to talk about the basic contents of a cover letter and what to include. So there's really 3 components, and you'll notice that overall these are very similar to a lot of the academic writing that you've done in your courses or will do in your courses coming up this term. It's typically a 4 to 5 paragraph essay. So essentially you have experience writing cover letters, nothing to sweat. You'll first start with an introduction and thesis statement about why you're qualified for the job. You'll follow with 2 to 3 body paragraphs that really back up your thesis and go into more detail about your qualifications and skills for the position. And then lastly, you'll have a conclusion, which reiterates your major points in your thesis and your appreciation for the employer's consideration as well. It's super important to note, and we'll dive into each one of these sections individually, but it's super important to note, as Emmeline mentioned, that there is no one-size-fit-all approach to cover letters. I know we showed the general format before, but please know that your cover letter is really your time to highlight your passions and your own personality. So don't get caught up in the particulars too much. And now we'll dive into the different paragraphs. So we'll start with the first paragraph. So it's really common that we see students start their cover letters with something like, hello, my name is blank, I'm applying for X position, just like the example that Emmeline went over previously. Like we talked about, it's fine that you do that, but I think it might be more beneficial to really start with an introduction that really highlights the why you're interested in the opportunity, where you heard about the opportunity, potentially if you have a connection to the organization as well. There's a lot of ways to bring more interesting and personal elements into your introduction, but once again, do what's most natural for you. Once again, where you heard about the job, why you're interested are very important to cover. After your introduction, you're also going to want to include a thesis statement. What a thesis statement is really 2 to 4 of your top qualities that's relevant for the employer. And it's really your opportunity to express confidence that you have those skills and ability to excel in the position. Typically, these skills can be found within a position description when you're looking at a job. So that's where you can kind of pinpoint those opportunities, and then you can really take time to reflect on your own experiences to talk about them within this thesis statement and then into your body paragraphs as well. So for example, a thesis statement is, I prepared one here. I hope you'll agree my extensive knowledge about the Dewey Decimal System and passion for connecting communities to literature in new and innovative ways will make me a strong candidate for this position. And then this individual will go in and talking about the skills that they highlighted within that sentence. So next you'll have your 2 to 3 body paragraphs, and these are really going to be the meat and potatoes of your cover letter. So this is really your opportunity to go into detail about the skills that you listed in your thesis. So for example, the one I just read, in the same order that you listed them in your thesis. So rather than trying to incorporate every instance where you've demonstrated that skill in various experiences, you're going to want to maybe choose 1 or 2 specific examples or situations and go into more detail about those situations. Lastly, you'll want to conclude with you'll conclude each body paragraph then with connecting your skills to the organization. So once again, as Emmeline mentioned, you're really trying to answer 2 questions. Why you and why them? Lastly, you'll conclude your conclusion. You'll once again restate your thesis. You'll use a little bit of different phrasing than you did in your introduction and indicate once again your reason for applying and why you're interested in the position. If you need to share any other additional information such as relevant schedule issues or your graduation date or contact information, you can also do this here. But then you can simply sign off with a phrase like, thank you for your time and thoughtful consideration. I look forward to hearing from you soon. And then sign your name to conclude. And now we'll kick it back over to Emmeline to talk about submitting your application.
Fantastic. Thanks, Devin. Here's hoping I don't cut out again, but if I do, you know what's going on. Technical issues are constant of working virtually. So speaking of technical difficulties, submitting your application seems like it should be a pretty straightforward process and not something you really have to think about. But in reality, there are a few things you should know. Submitting your materials makes an impression, and how you go about that can really make a difference in kind of the first impression that an employer has of your application. So a couple things that you can do are save your resume and your cover letter as PDFs so that when they're opened up in a different system, the formatting doesn't go all funky. I have seen everything from like when you open a PDF, it goes on to suddenly 3 pages, parts of it get cut off. You never know what's going to happen. But PDFs are the safest form rather than like a Word document or a Google document or anything like that. PDFs tend to be your best bet. You also want to use titles like the one shown here, white, tell, and cover letter, to help your employer stay organized and to help them know exactly what's in each one of those documents. It's really helpful for them. You also want to make sure that you're following the instructions. This can be anything from like if you need to submit it with a certain subject line through email or anything like that, what exactly you need to include. It's really important that you're following all of those instructions, because if you show that you're not able to follow instructions as an applicant, they aren't going to assume that you're going to be able to follow instructions as an employee. So definitely be careful here, take the extra time, read through it multiple times. You also want to make sure you submit before the deadline. So I would say a minimum of 24 hours before the deadline, because like what happened with me, you never know if there's going to be a technical issue. You don't know if your computer is going to crash, your Wi-Fi is going to go out. So having that little bit of a buffer just takes some of the weight off your mind in terms of making sure that your application is correctly submitted. It's also important to demonstrate professional communication, especially if you're submitting by email. So a couple good ideas: use the same email address that's on your resume for consistency. Include a relevant subject line, something like the position title and candidate application, something like that. Include a short message, so don't just like attach your resume and cover letter and send it. Do a short message thanking the reader for taking the time to look at your materials, and add a signature so that they know who it is. All right, so once you've submitted your application, you may or may not hear back from the employer right away. So we're going to do one last survey asking you, if you don't hear back after submitting your application, it's okay to contact the employer after 1 to 2 days, 1 week, 2 weeks, 1 month, or never. Please vote in the survey when it comes up. Okay, we'll give it a couple more seconds. This is our last survey for the day, so please participate. All right, and let's see what you said. Okay, so a little bit all across the board. We have a couple of people who said 1 to 2 days, a couple more that said 1 week. The majority said 2 weeks, a few that said a month, and a couple that said never. So the answer is at least 2 weeks after the deadline. So there are really no hard and fast rules, so technically you're all correct, but best practice is to wait at least 2 weeks after the application has closed. So not after you've submitted your application, especially if you're submitting in advance, but after the application has closed to contact the employer. This gives them a little bit of time to start processing and kind of get a handle on all the applications that they've received before you're reaching out to be in touch with them. You want to give them that little bit of time so that you aren't seeming overeager, or it can just kind of make a bad impression if they have just looked at the applications, they haven't even started going through them yet, and you're already emailing them asking about an answer. You want to give them a little bit of time and a little bit of space to kind of work through their processes. So at least 2 weeks after the deadline. And when you do, make sure to reiterate your interest in the opportunity, provide any necessary updates about kind of where you're at in the process, like if you've received another offer or anything like that that they really need to know. And again, thank them for their time. All right, so that is kind of the end of our material. We're going to take some questions before we move into the follow-up. So do you have any questions about cover letters or about kind of this application submission process? Oh, it looks like we've got one in the chat. So I'm applying to several jobs at UW-Madison. Do you have any insight on when to submit your application materials? Is it better to submit them 1 to 3 days of the posting or wait toward the end of the application posting? So this is something that's a little bit different based on each institution. At UW-Madison, they tend to not start evaluating applications until the deadline has passed, but that can be different based on different applications. In general, I would say that you're safe to submit it anytime before the deadline, as long as they don't say anything about like a rolling deadline or applications are being accepted until the position is filled. If it says either one of those things, you definitely want to go earlier rather than later. But if there's no indication that somebody's going to start reviewing applications sooner, it doesn't really give you an advantage to submit earlier. So it's worth taking that extra time to really make sure your application materials are as strong as possible. All right, any other questions? Okay. All right, so we will move on to our kind of next steps and follow up. But at this point, you're pretty much ready to apply. You know how to write a strong resume, you know how to write a strong cover letter, but if you have any other questions or don't feel like you're ready, that's okay. We are still here to help.
Yeah, absolutely. Like Emmeline said, we are SuccessWorks with the College of Letters and Science. So we do meet with current students and recent grads up to a year after graduation. So we're really your one-stop shop for personal and professional development. So as you start working on those resumes and cover letters or those bullet points, right, that are very challenging to write, we are here to support you through every step of that process. Right now, we're only doing virtual appointments. So you're welcome to go on our website, and the first thing that you'll see, which is successworks.wis.edu, you'll see a resource sheet that we send out after. but you can create an appointment with a specialist right on there, or ask to see an alumni too, like we talked about before as well. This presentation has been brought to you as part of our Badgers on Track series, so really our summer strategies for professional success. And we want to formally invite you. Next week, we have our last presentation, which is our virtual interview workshop. I see it looks like we got a little bit cut off there. Oh, nope, there it is, Virtual Interview with Confidence. And that'll be July 14th, 1 to 2 p.m. And you can sign up for that on Handshake or in the resource sheet that we send out after. You can always sign up for that on there too. We look forward to seeing you next week. Just a few other housekeeping bits before we take out. We really want your feedback on how this went today. We do take your feedback very seriously, and we do use it to make improvements to help you all as students. So I'm putting in the chat right now our survey to where you can give us your feedback on today's presentation. I'll also throw in the chat, I'm pulling it up here, the link to the resource sheet that we keep promising you. You will get this in an email as well, but just in case you do want to access that, I just threw that in the chat as well. Once again, on behalf of SuccessWorks, we formally thank you for attending today's workshop. And I believe Emmeline, Beth, and myself will be sticking around for a little bit. If anyone has questions, you're welcome to ask us or throw them in the chat.
Yes, thank you all so much for coming today. It was wonderful to see all of you. Like Devin said, we really do want your feedback about how we can make this process as impactful and helpful for you as possible. These are a new series that we're starting, so definitely any feedback you have is really helpful. And we will stick around for a couple more minutes in case you have other questions.